Spanning an illustrious career of over 6 decades, Miss Katharine Hepburn played a spectrum of comedic and dramatic roles that were often provocative, fiercely independent, and always with their wits. She would never let the audience down. Rather, we would stay glued to the edge of our seats, captivated by her no-nonsense attitude and her bold fashion choices, such as her tendency to wear pants at a time when women wouldn't dare stray from fashion norms. To this day, Katharine Hepburn is one of the most recognizable Hollywood icons, but we're sure there are a few things you still don't know about her. In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the shocking and even scandalous truths behind this legendary actress. Make sure you stick around until the end of the video to learn about her decades-long affair and how it tragically came to an end. Facts First presents Katharine Hepburn's 27-year affair and 10 other facts. Before we get down to business, make sure you tap like and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tap the bell icon to turn on notifications. Katharine Hepburn was always a bit of a tomboy. It may not seem like a big deal to today's lax standards, but Katharine Hepburn was a fearless fashion boundary pusher for her day. She was well known to wear pants during a time period where women basically never wore anything but dresses and skirts. It was unheard of to see a female in a suit or jeans. In fact, it was downright offensive to the more conservative crowd at the time. She didn't care. She wanted to be comfortable. Hepburn wasn't going to compromise who she was just to appease men or the religious right. She would even be granted a Lifetime Achievement Award in 1986 by the Council of Fashion Designers of America for her unflinching fashion sense. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Hepburn's mother was a women's rights activist who raised awareness for the women's suffrage movement and a woman's right to have access to birth control. There was one summer in particular that Katharine even cut her hair short into a boy cut and went by the name of Jimmy. She was feeling experimental at the time and deeply dissatisfied with the expectations of the female gender. She never wanted to be some kind of fair, frail creature just to be sexualized by men. She always wanted to be viewed as strong and independent. We think she succeeded at that. Katharine had a traumatic event in her childhood that would haunt her for years to come. There's a very dark tradition of suicide in the Hepburn family. 2 of her uncles, 1 great-uncle, and even her own grandfather would take their own lives in this morbid manner. When young Katharine was only 13, she would come home one day to see a frightening, traumatic sight. Her brother was hanging from the rafters of her family home in an apparent suicide. Their family flatly denied he had taken his own life intentionally, however. They insisted it was some kind of accident related to an ill-fated magic routine gone awry. Apparently, he had tried a faux hanging routine once before, but no one can be certain what really happened on that tragic day. Hepburn thought it better to buy out her contract for the lake instead of finishing her run. Miss Hepburn would get her start in show business in 2 Broadway plays, Art and Mrs. Bottle, which hit the stage in 1930, and The Warrior's Husband in 1932. She would follow these 2 up with 1939's The Lake, which was critically panned for its weak script and less than stellar supporting cast. To boot, Hepburn was being worked to death and treated like an indentured servant by ruthless director Jed Harris. She absolutely disdained working with the show so much, she bought herself out of her own contract and got the heck out of there. This no doubt proved to be a learning moment for 26-year-old Katharine, who is still figuring out the ins and outs of the industry. The Lake actually gave birth to one of Katharine's most memorable lines. Despite being a relatively low point in her career, Hepburn would borrow a line from The Lake when performing in 1937's Stage Door. In the film, Katharine plays an aspiring young actress who is pitted up against her boarding housemates for a part in a play by director Gregory LaCava. The line she borrows is, "The calla lilies are in bloom again." This line, which appears several times throughout the flick, would become one of her trademark expressions. It was so popular, it would even be uttered by Lucille Ball in I Love Lucy and referenced in the 1988 comedy Big Top Pee-wee, starring Pee Wee Herman. Hepburn would throw a cup of ice-cold water on her co-star in Stage Door. Katharine really wasn't someone you wanted to rub the wrong way, lest you suffer the consequences. Ginger Roger, her co-star on Stage Door, learned this the hard way. So the story goes, Howard Hughes, who was dating Hepburn at the time, had shown some interest in Ginger, and Katharine was livid. She couldn't have some other woman creeping on her man like that. So when Ginger came on set one day wearing a brand new mink coat, Hepburn seized the opportunity to make a scene and bare her teeth a bit by dousing her in a cup of water. She explained if it was real mink, it wouldn't shrink. Great excuse, Katharine. Just admit, you were jelly. Ginger would later be posed the question of why she thought Katharine had done the unbecoming, dastardly deed. She played it off cool, though, by saying she didn't have the faintest idea why she would have done it. Miss Rogers was completely unwilling to substantiate the rumors she and Hughes had something going on. Fair enough. As crazy as it sounds, for a while, Hepburn was considered to be a curse for the box office. Box office poison actually was the term used by the Independent Theater Owners Association to describe Katharine Hepburn after several substantial box office failures, such as Mary of Scotland in 1935 and Spitfire in 1934. Even though it would later become a classic and a much adored standard, Katharine's 1938 comedy Bringing Up Baby would be a monumental flop at the time. Despite the unflattering label by the Theater Owners Association, Hepburn would be completely undeterred. She knew she wasn't some kind of washed-up actress past her prime. Why should she feel that way when Stage Door and Bringing Up Baby would both go on to gross over $2 million? Adjusted for inflation, that comes out to about $37 million today. Not too shabby, Katharine. Despite the heckling of her critics, which obviously had no clue what they were talking about, she would go on to accept the starring role in a film that would propel her career into superstardom. Screenwriter Philip Barry, straight off of Broadway, would pen a script that was specifically written with her in mind, the iconic film The Philadelphia Story. The film would first see itself as a stage play, but with the help of a certain multimillionaire Howard Hughes, the rights for the play were purchased, and immediately a film was in production, with Hepburn reprising her lead role. The Philadelphia Story would prove to be one of the biggest hits of Katharine Hepburn's career, and would put the metaphorical foot in the mouths of critics who doubted her ability just a year before. Katharine was all about the brown liquor. If you assumed Katharine Hepburn's drink of choice was something like champagne or a cosmopolitan, then you're crazy, because she was all about that good old American corn whiskey. She respectfully didn't drink much when she was with her late husband Spencer Tracy because he was well known to have a bit of a drinking problem. Later on in life, however, after his passing, she was well known to enjoy a nice glass of whiskey on the rocks. She would explain she had discovered it helped alleviate the symptoms of a tremor she had, which probably was passed on to her genetically from her grandpa. But regardless of its potentially medically relieving effects, she was just into the aesthetics and effects of whiskey in general. She would exclaim it only took so much as a whiff of whiskey for her to want it, and that the taste was something like a work of art to her. She even said she would drink it morning, noon, and night if she could. Katharine once held the record for having the most Academy Award nominations. Hepburn is a veritable legend of the screen. In 1981, when she was nominated for Best Actress on the film On Golden Pond, she set the record for having the most nominations of any other actor in their career. In case you're wondering, it was her 12th nomination. That record would be stolen from her when Meryl Streep would supersede her claim to fame with her 13th nomination in 2004 for the film Adaptation. Not only that, Streep would nearly double her nomination tally by earning 21 nominations as of 2020. Katharine is still on top when it comes to wins, however, with her 4 compared to Streep's 3. Katharine had a super secret brownie recipe that was known to be able to split up marriages. So Katharine really knew her way around a kitchen. In fact, she loved to bake. Her favorite recipe? Moist, warm brownies. In 2015, the New York Times would publish her super secret and ever so coveted recipe. A woman by the name of Sydney Newberry would take the recipe and make a pan of brownies for her husband when she was visiting the air base he was stationed at in Germany. She thought she would be generous and share the recipe with her husband and his friends. Despite her repeated attempts to recreate the brownies, she failed to recreate the texture and flavor that she and her husband so enjoyed. This left her rather frustrated and suspicious that maybe the recipe she was given was omitting some key ingredient or step. That frustration fueled her to go to the States to visit her friend, where she would seduce her husband and eventually run off with him. I guess all it took was a screwed-up brownie recipe, and he was hooked. Go figure. Katharine had a scandalous affair that lasted for decades. Miss Hepburn would have an eyebrow-raising affair with one of her recurring co-stars, Spencer Tracy, that would last for 27 years. Tracy was separated from his wife at the time, but they never officially divorced, seeing they were both Catholic, and divorce was a no-no. We already knew Katharine wasn't new to being a bit scandalous at times, but at the time, this kind of open infidelity was still shocking. She would co-star with Tracy on 9 feature films, including Women of the Year in 1949 and Pat and Mike in 1952. The last film they would star in together would be 1967's comedy classic Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Tragically, however, Tracy would die of a heart attack several weeks after production wrapped up at the relatively young age of 67. Well, that wraps up our in-depth look at the career of Katharine Hepburn. Now we'd like to hear from you. Do you support the long-running affair, or do you think Tracy should have gotten a divorce? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to Facts Verse for more videos.